Hello and welcome back to History with Richard. Very exciting news today, or just, news. Sorry, let me have a sip of my tea. Today we're actually going to do an entire episode where the main character is not a male. So, congrats to me. It only took me, 6 or 7 episodes to get there, but we're doing it today. And the inspiration for this is this book here. Now, I don't want to out the author too much, Bamba Gascoigne. I haven't actually read through the whole thing. I think it's actually really cool. It was, let's see, when was the publication date? 2003. Okay. So in this entire book, right, you can see that on the video here. The Dynasties of China, 3,500 years of Chinese civilization. A highly readable and evocative account of Chinese history. I'm sure it is. Not a single mention of the... Actually, wait, there is one. I tabbed it here. One mention of the empress that ruled China for I think about 50 years. The rest are all like emperors. And yeah, she's mentioned once in the whole thing. And knowing a little bit about her, I think they could have written a whole chapter because her life is really interesting and super, super strange. Again, I keep coming back to it. You know, history is full of the strangest stories because oftentimes, depending on where we live in the world, we forget sort of the history, or we don't know the history of pretty much anywhere else. So, hearing that sounds strange to us, whereas our history might sound super strange to someone from China or something. But yeah, it's all relative. This is truly like a mind-boggling story. I think even for, people in China now. China has changed so much in the last 100 years. And it was very different. We're going to go back. So let's turn the globe back to where we were previously. I was talking about Atahualpa, the Tawantinsuyu, the Incas. Now, and we were in, 1530-ish. Now we need to go back 600 years, more than 600 years, like 900 years, to the 600s AD, okay? So 600s in the Common Era. Truly fascinating time in history. And I want us to focus on, I think it'll be centered in the shot here. I want us to focus on China and India and the East, right? It's all going to be about that. Enough with, European empires. What's going on in this part of the world at the moment? We have Buddhism absolutely, at its peak. And we have one of the oldest universities, one of the biggest universities ever founded in India at the time. Here in, the massive plains that flow down, the rivers that flow down from the Himalayas, the plains of North India, which is still the most populous place, I think, on the entire planet. If we take an area above a certain size, I think it's, the Nile River, which is, that makes sense because Egypt is all desert around the Nile. That has super high population density. Gaza City, I don't know there's no statistics there now, with the tragedy that's happened there. And parts of southeastern China, but this part especially here, where the Ganges, all along the Ganges, and then in Bangladesh, modern day Bangladesh, where the mouth of the Ganges is. And Nalanda University, that the nexus of all essentially Buddhist knowledge, all the big gurus of Buddhism go to Nalanda, is in modern day, my friend Nish will love this because he's from here, modern day Bihar, which is a fairly neglected part of India today. Patna, I can see, is the capital of Bihar. Nalanda is, I think, north of the Ganges, and as you make your way to the Himalayas. You can still visit it today. It's not on the big tourist maps. I actually have never been to India. It's one of my, it's top on my bucket list, I think, for places to go, especially while I'm, living here in Australia. It's more accessible. Yeah, you won't find it on the tourist maps, Nalanda University. But in the 600s AD, this place was absolutely at the peak of Sanskrit culture. If you remember from our very first episode, the Indian subcontinent has had a super long history, Vedic history. The modern, I always find it really funny, the modern lycra wearing like California mum craze of yoga is actually, thousands of years old. In India, it's like a really weird cultural moment where it's like become really resurgent amongst Californian women and North Shore Sydney mums. I think it's really nice, actually, yoga. But anyway, getting sidetracked. India is, a lot of stuff comes from India. I'm going to do another episode. I'm going to give away the title, but the Arabic numerals, so-called Arabic numerals that we use, all the numbers, including a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they're Indian. And the most important number, 0, was a concept that was thought about for the first time in India a long time ago, almost at the time of Christ, I think even before the time of Christ. Okay, so spend a lot of time on India. What's happening in China in the 600s? China, if I look through the dynasties here quickly, because I can never remember them off the top of my head. My friend Modi will know these dynasties from Hong Kong, and they get taught these in school, apparently, he says. So we had the Shang dynasty, then the Zhou dynasty, and then the Han dynasty. So the Shang starts, what's that? 3,600 years ago, in 1,600 before the Common Era, BC. And the third dynasty, the Han, ends in 220, and then there's sort of a 400-year gap until we get to the Tang dynasty, which starts in 618, according to this. And Wu Zetian, the empress of China, I think ascends to the throne in something like 670 or 680, something like that, 650-ish, around that time. She's right at the start of the Tang dynasty. And I think there was quite a tumultuous period between the end of the Han and the start of the Tang. But whatever. At this point, 600s, China is flourishing. The capital of China is at a place called, or what modern day is called Xi'an. Used to be called Chang'an, I think. And China has a very weird, not weird actually, it makes complete sense at the time. It has an obsession with Buddhism. Buddhism, or Buddhist texts, have arrived in China from places like Nalanda in India, and it's written in Sanskrit. And there are people getting snippets of translations. The Chinese, who have had a super long history of philosophy themselves with Confucius. I read in the introduction of this that Confucius, I think, was alive 200 years before the famous Greek philosopher Socrates. And let's see if I can find it. There's a really interesting, here it is, thing that I found in here. So Confucius is what we call him in English. Never thought about the fact that that is not a Chinese name at all. So that's just the Latin version of Kong Fu Zi. Apologies to all Chinese listeners, I've definitely butchered that, but Kong Fu Zi has been, I love this word, bastardized, completely just mangled, wrecked into Confucius. I don't know why we're gonna just call him by his actual name, Kong Fu Zi. I'm gonna call Wu Zetian by her actual name, because she was, a crazily impressive lady, very ruthless in a lot of ways. Reminds me, I keep thinking again that Game of Thrones is the most accurate, even though it's fantasy, it's the most accurate sort of representation of what history was actually like. How the moral lines were blurred. People from far away were actually a lot more interconnected with you than a lot of the times we think. Anyway, if I was to make a Game of Thrones comparison, Queen Cersei is not a great one, but it's sort of where I'm going with Wu Zetian. I like Wu Zetian a lot more than I liked Queen Cersei in Game of Thrones. She's like a better version of her. And a very important character in Wu Zetian's life, who's a bit older than her. He'll be the only male character in our story. Oh, I guess we mentioned Confucius and some other people. Xuanzang, again, I've definitely butchered that, but Xuanzang was this monk. And I'm going to make, I want to make lots of episodes about him because he's just, another person who, if I could sit down and interview him today about his life, I would love to do that. Or go on his journey with him. He was a monk in Xi'an, here. To get from Xi'an to Nalanda, here, you would think, it's not that far, you'd think that you could just cross these mountains here, cross the Himalayas. I've never actually thought maybe you can just come, through Burma, the impenetrable jungles of Burma, and then you're there. This was not the case at all. People couldn't go from Xi'an through, this is Tibet, called the roof of the world because it's this massive plateau, here's Tibet as well, massive plateau sitting above the Himalayas that's very cold, the air is very thin, and it was quite warlike for a long time, or it was not safe to go there for travelers. And at this time, what do we say, 600s-ish AD, if you've ever heard of the Silk Road and Marco Polo and stuff like that, the Marco Polo show is actually quite good. I remember if a guy called Flynn is watching this, I remember sitting in Christian studies class with this guy called Flynn in school, and he showed me this Marco Polo show for the first time. And up until then, I had only heard about Marco Polo from the game you play whilst in a swimming pool trying to catch other people. I realized that Marco Polo was, I think he was like Genoese or Venetian or something, and he, anyway, came all the way from Europe to China. And that was the Silk Road. That was like in the 1300s. We're 700 years before that. There was already a Silk Road, a trading route that went from Xi'an, crazy trading route where you'd have to go across this massive desert area here. So you had to completely avoid Tibet. That wasn't safe. You enter what's called the Taklamakan Desert, and I think the Gobi Desert is here. I think from Xi'an you don't have to go through the Gobi. That's in Mongolia today. Very inhospitable. The Taklamakan is pretty much just as inhospitable. You got to travel here. You get to an oasis here called Dunhuang in the Taklamakan, and then you have two options. You either go north. There are still mountains here. The Himalayas sort of do this big arc. They're just called different things at different times. This is Himalayas, then it's the Pamirs, the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan, and this is up here it's called the Tian Shan Mountains. From the oasis city of Dunhuang, you have to choose. Do I go through the mountain passes of the Tian Shan, or do I go through the whole length of the Taklamakan Desert and then do an even gnarlier trek through the Hindu Kush, okay? Most people choose the easier one, north, go along the Tian Shan Mountains, and then we're back in my favorite part of the world, this Central Asian region, which is, like I keep saying, very neglected, not talked about enough. This Northern Silk Road was how people, the only way essentially, overland, there was some shipping routes already, but overland was the only way you could get from the Chinese capital, which I don't think had a big major river running through it, so it was hard to get there from, with a boat directly. To get from Xi'an, Taklamakan Desert here, north through the Tian Shan Mountains, and then you're sort of on the other side of the big Himalaya divide. You can skirt across around here, through Afghanistan, through, all these countries now that never get talked about really. Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, parts of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and there's a really gnarly bit where you go through Afghanistan. Again, I'll go through this in more detail in the Xuanzang episode that I will make. But so there's a part where, do you remember from the first episode, if you haven't listened, I think it does give good context to this. Do you remember how the Barmakids, the patrons, the guys who were these Central Asian wizards of knowledge that the Islamic Caliphate in Baghdad were sort of giving lots of money, sponsoring so that they could get a lot of Central Asian texts and Indian works of knowledge and stuff. The Barmakids are from Afghanistan. They're from the place called Balkh in the north here. So you've come through the Tian Shan Mountains. You're now in Balkh here in Afghanistan, and that's sort of your last rest stop before doing a really nasty part of the trek. You then go south. You have to go through, what's the name of the mountains? I can't remember now. I think it's like part of the Hindu Kush still. You gotta go through these really high mountains, steep passes. And the only road today goes through a tunnel in Afghanistan. If you want to drive from Kabul to Balkh, you gotta go through a tunnel built by the Soviets in like the 1980s or something. So before that, you had to do this crazy trek through the mountains. And then before even you get to Kabul, the first stop usually was a place called Bamiyan. Man, if I could visit Afghanistan, I would. I mean, as a man, I can, unfortunately. But I don't know if I would want to go there now with the Taliban. If I could go to Bamiyan, there was this amazing, secluded valley. And there were these huge, like if you imagine pyramids of Giza level, like Sphinx carving level, massive. I think they were like 40 or 50 meters high, stone carved Buddhas in the mountainside. So you come through this steep pass, you see these enormous like stone Buddha carvings, and they're not the classic Buddha carvings we see now in like Bali and stuff where it's a little fat man sitting cross-legged. No, they were like magisterial, upright, very impressive things. Unfortunately, I think the Taliban have blown them up now or have severely damaged them. Anyway, you see Bamiyan, you're like, okay, I'm back in safety now, in civilization. These were all, by the way, at this time, Buddhist sort of like monasteries and towns, all right? This Central Asian area does a lot of changing of hands in terms of religion and who rules it, but at this time it's mostly Buddhist because we're in the golden age of Buddhism in the 600s AD, which is when Wu Zetian, I'll get to it eventually, I promise, the protagonist of this story. Well, I guess, I promised it to be only about Wu Zetian, and then I started nerding out about Xuanzang. So we have they're contemporaries at least, we have two main characters in this story. And then, we'll go through the rest of it in a different episode, but I really love Bamiyan and Kabul and Afghanistan. I think it's, one of the coolest places in the world, especially because it's on this like really important trade route from India overland, both to China and to the rest of the world. Let's leave Xuanzang there for now. And let's now finally start with Wu Zetian. Where was she born? Yeah, what's the deal with her? I think the name of the emperor, the name of the Chinese emperor at the time when she was born was Gaozhong, I think. That'd be really embarrassing if I get that wrong. The names, I think, aren't super important in a lot of... for my stories, I really should do more research and check out the names beforehand, but I'm trying to just do like a natural storytelling. So I'll just say the first emperor, who is around when Wu Zetian, is important that I get her name right. When she's born, this emperor is, I think, relatively, like he's maybe 30 or 40 years old. He's not a super young man. And her father, Wu Zetian's father, is a very wealthy man. He's a timber merchant or something. They come from, it's not entirely clear where she was born, but she's like in and around, her dad's in and around, mixing it with the emperor's top officials. Okay, he's a wealthy man. I think he's in the inner circle of maybe not the emperor himself, but close enough. And he makes sure that by the age of 14, Wu is very well educated. She's very widely read. She's basically as smart as you can get for a 14-year-old. And then something crucial happens in her life, something very disturbing for us to think about now, but she enters essentially the emperor's harem. That's the Islamic word for it, but the Chinese emperors at this time have lots of wives, have lots of women in the royal court, and there's like an entire politics amongst the women of who is the primary concubine, who has the emperor's ear. And Wu Zetian starts right at the bottom. I think her father pulls some strings. I guess he thinks the only way for his daughter to get somewhere in life, other than reach somewhere even higher, she's already pretty privileged, is this very strange thing for us to think about now. Yeah, to essentially become the bed partner of the emperor, for him to call upon at any time, as far as I'm aware, and basically gets, a comfortable enough life in the women's quarters, but does like the laundry and, all the menial tasks with this, extra thing of, like sexual favors, essentially. So she's 14. She starts by washing the linen, apparently, when she's 14. And very quickly, the emperor realizes Wu is different from the other concubines that he has. She can quote, not Confucius, I'm going to say Confuzi. She knows the history of some of the previous dynasties really well, and she's just a really smart, intelligent, very perceptive girl for her age. And he sort of dotes on her. Again, I'm not sort of going to try and pretend to know exactly what that means, whether it's, wholesome or not. Probably assume it's not, but whatever. She rises up. And then something monumental happens in her life. The old emperor, who's by now, 50s, late 60s, he passes away. And I can't remember exactly what kills him, some sort of disease. And on his deathbed, he has a son, right? And the Chinese at this point don't have big succession squabbles. Normally, once a dynasty is established, it goes from like father to son, the emperor. His son is preparing to be emperor, visiting his father's deathbed. And Wu realizes she's still not, still sort of a young person at this time, maybe like 18 or 19. She realizes if the old emperor dies, she has to live out the rest of her days as a nun. That was the custom, I think, if the emperor died at this time, all the concubines were like a big no-go zone for the next emperor, who was obviously normally the son of the previous one. It was considered incestuous to have the same concubines as your father. And all these women would get shipped off, I'm assuming like against their will, especially if you're 18 and 19, to live out the rest of their days in a monastery. So if we can all remember back to when we were that age, or remember forwards if we're younger than that, no 18-year-old wants to go live in a monastery, right? So she realizes the only way to change her situation is by doing something heretical. She doesn't really care. She's just looking out for herself. Honestly, I would have probably, all kudos to her. That's what most people would do. It's sort of interesting to think, because there were times in European history where, chastity and purity were so highly coveted amongst like men and women, but women especially, with the Catholic Church in particular, that people would go to very extreme lengths to preserve that, even sort of against their own personal interests, because they were more worried about their relationship with God. But that does not seem to be the case with this Confucian era or Confucian era of China. I'm not actually, again, I'm not an expert on China. I just really like Wu's story. What she does is she ends up sort of flirting with the emperor's son. And by the time, again, maybe he initiated it, maybe she initiated it. I'm going to say, for the sake of the story, she initiated it, because she was the one who was going to end up stuck in a monastery if this didn't work out. So maybe she really liked the son anyway, and sort of found the dad an old creep. Who knows? The thing is, when the new emperor gets crowned, or has his coronation, I don't know what the exact term is, he already really likes Wu, but he can't take her into his sort of palace, because all the sort of senior ministers and powerful officials who are obsessed with tradition will say that it's incestuous. So she gets put in the monastery. I guess monastery is the right word. I don't know what the name is for. Maybe Buddhism has monasteries as well. I think so. Yeah, it's not just a Christian thing. The Buddhist monastery, or the Confucian monastery at this time, not Buddhist. And she's stuck there, and she writes a series of letters, which I would really like to read one day. You can read the translations of them, or if you know the Chinese characters, you can read that. And she tries her heart out to, she's writing love letters to the emperor. And eventually he realizes he misses her so much, he just can't bear it anymore. There's a very famous scene. Again, we don't know if it's completely real, but I like to believe it's real. It's good for the story. He arrives at the monastery. He's had enough of sort of life without Wu. And apparently when they see each other for the first time in years, I think it's been 4 or 5 years at this point, they embrace each other, weep, sort of forego any traditional, any of the normal way to show yourself in public. If you're, a high standing, if you're the emperor, you don't show emotion and cry and hug people all that much. But anyway, this happens. And she's back. She's back at the palace, and she's back as now not the chief concubine, because that would be far too scandalous. She's like number 3 in line now, okay? And this is where Wu becomes, very Cersei-like in her behavior. She wants to be number 1. She wants to have the ear of the emperor. For whatever reason, maybe it's power, maybe it's greed, maybe she just thinks the other women suck, I don't know. What she does next is sort of unforgivable, very disturbing behavior. The legend goes, she has a child by the emperor. And this child is found dead one morning, like a newborn baby. And Wu is in tears. She tells I think it was like a eunuch guard. There was, a lot of empires in history were obsessed with having eunuchs as palace guards. The eunuch guard says, Wu, what's wrong? Or what's wrong with your baby? She says, the baby's dead, and it was Wang. Now, Wang was number 2, or I think the primary concubine of the emperor. Now, and the legend goes, right, that Wang never saw the baby, never killed the baby, that it was Wu herself who strangled her own child and blamed someone else. Not just someone else, blamed the person in her way that would, so ensuring the downfall of Wang and the person who was number 2 would eventually, would get, Wu to number 1. If that's true, that's some truly, like Machiavellian behavior there. Let's say, for the sake of argument, because people are very complicated, that it is true, that she just for some reason wanted to be number 1. She wasn't content being number 3. And she does this. It gets even crazier next. So somehow she convinces the emperor that this is actually what happened, that Wang, despite all her protestations, saying, like, to the contrary, saying, no, I had nothing to do with killing this child. Wu Zetian says, no, she did it. And not only that, the number 2, I think Zhao was her name, she was an accomplice. They both planned this to, spite me. And the emperor believes her. She must have been quite persuasive. And what she does next, even, words can't really describe. So they're imprisoned, these 2 women. Wu, who is now, chief concubine, because number 1 and 2 have fallen in disgrace. She tells the emperor, or tells a eunuch or something. I don't think she does it personally, but what happens is both the women get their hands, trigger warning, this is going to be very gruesome, have both their hands and their feet chopped off. And as a final humiliation and just an agonizing way to kill them, she fills this big vat of wine, okay? And she throws these 2 women in there. Remember, their hands and their feet have been cut off. There is just direct IV access to their bloodstream, and the alcohol must have been like excruciatingly painful, burning the stumps of their hands and feet, and it's leaching into their bloodstream. And these women, died a horrible death. I won't gruesome you out too much. They took days to die. They die. It's truly horrific. But Wu has gotten what she wanted. She's now chief concubine to the emperor. Eventually, we'll fast forward a little bit. The emperor is old and passes away, and Wu, who has gained so much power by this time, is the empress. She has children by the emperor who will become the next emperor, but they're still young. And as regent, this sounds like very much like Cersei and Joffrey and stuff. As regent, she rules China for a long time. And she's never assassinated or anything. She's a very canny operator. Despite her sort of bloody rise to the top, which I don't think is that different from a lot of other men that gets, worshipped around the world. and that this was like the only path, right, for a woman to do it. There was no sort of, I don't know, I guess if she had an army, 10,000 strong or something, she could have just taken over in a palace coup. But, this was the only way that realistically she could get to the top. And she has quite a peaceful reign at the top, despite, Cersei was not very peaceful in Game of Thrones. Wu Zetian does some cool stuff. One of the stuff she does, which you can still see today in modern day Xi'an, remember Xuanzang and his crazy journey, over the Tian Shan mountains down to Nalanda here. His main reason he did this is because he wanted to consult the original Sanskrit texts. He was this Buddhist monk who was obsessed with spirituality and religion. He does that. Not only that, he comes all the way back, the crazy journey, and he's now sitting in Xi'an with Wu Zetian as empress. And he asks the empress, I think the previous emperor was already pretty impressed, so Wu's husband was already pretty impressed with Xuanzang, had built what they call the giant wild goose pagoda. It's still standing in Xi'an. It's like 1,500 years old. And it sort of needs an upgrade, essentially, because I think it's because Xuanzang has so many Sanskrit scrolls that he needs an extension built, essentially. And Wu does this, no questions asked. She builds this wild goose pagoda into something even more extraordinary, like would have been massive building at the time, and it's still standing in Xi'an. And she dies, I think at the age of 70 or something. Right at the end, she's forced to abdicate by some powerful officials because, they've had enough of her reign and they think that by Confucian law, no women should ever be able to rule and stuff like that. But she's essentially made it out the other side. No one assassinates her. I can't remember exactly the circumstances of her death. By the time she abdicates, she's already pretty old. And I think if you'd asked her at her deathbed, did she achieve what she wanted? I think she might have said yes. She would have had lots of regrets maybe, but I think she would have been maybe to some extent content at the end, despite throwing people into vats of wine who have had their hands and feet chopped off. And you can visit her tombstone still in Xi'an today. And the sad thing is now, it's this beautiful, it's like, imagine a big long street of stone with hills on about either side. And there's these two sort of pillars that come out, or these like little pyramid shaped massive stone monuments. So you're looking down this long vista, you see where the tombs are, and there are these epitaphs or tombstones at the end that have some of the Tang emperors. And hers is there, but on her tombstone, still today, and sort of, I think as an act of spite by people who came later, there is nothing written on her tombstone. I don't even think her name is written there. So all the other male emperors have, lists of their achievements and whatever on there. Wu Zetian's tombstone is blank, and it stands out for that reason, which is kind of cool, but it's a tragedy that no one remembers her, and I'm sure that some people do remember her, but I just wanted to give her some airtime. That was the story of Wu Zetian, bit of Xuanzang woven in. Thank you for listening to this bonus, and see you on the next one. We will eventually, I promise, get to the fall of Atahualpa and the Incas, but I think you'll have enjoyed listening to this. Thank you, and stay curious always.